Are you looking for a podcast where you can hear from real people regarding their real dental drama? If so, then you've come to the right place. Join hosts Bethany Petty and Dr. Rena Kuba as we dive into the solutions we've created and the mistakes we've made while managing dental drama. Let's get started. Welcome back to the third week of discussing associates in your practice. Once again, I pick up right where Dr. Kuba and I left off last week. So there may very well be references that we'll make in this episode that you have questions on. If so, I would encourage you to go back and listen to part 1 and part 2, and you'll be able to get a full picture of our entire conversation. But at this point, you'll be diving right in to Dr. Kuba and I discussing how to find an associate for your practice. Listen in, and hopefully you'll enjoy.
So I do feel like this podcast is going on kind of long, and if we're going to have to split it up anyway, make it into 2 podcasts, kind of like we did with the insurance one. I'm going to go ahead and throw out the next question that a lot of people are probably going to ask is, where do you find said associate?
Yes. So surprisingly, it is easier than one might think. So you have found yours in a way that I would call organically. These are people that you knew, had a relationship with, or at least taught in the school setting. And so you knew these people from before. I would say your way of finding associates is abnormal because most people aren't in.
Like everything I do is abnormal. Stumble ass backwards into God knows what. Okay. Yes. Tell us the norm.
It's the best way because you have familiarity with these people before they come into your practice. I would say most practice owners are not in the situations that you're in where you're able to find these people. So you were teaching, very few practice owners teach. Right? So they're not coming across just naturally people that they like and come to know. And the people that they usually do know in the field are also practice owners. So it's like, okay, well, how do you find somebody if you're not running across just a random dentist in the supermarket that wants a job? It doesn't really happen that way. So surprisingly, it's pretty easy to file a job post. So of course, Dental Post is still the most utilized in the dental field and has good traction with associate doctors looking. I just had a client that posted for an associate, 1 day a week associate. She posted probably a month ago, and I warned her. I was like, I don't know. I haven't had a client in the last couple of years bring on an associate, and so I don't know if there's going to be anybody. We'll see. Surprisingly, within a couple days, we had 7 or 8 really good applications. And I was like, well, how about that? So we did hers on Dental Post and Indeed as well. You can also put job posts on the academies. All of them are leaving, but like AAPD, they should have a job.
Or like Dallas County Dental Society here for us.
All of the societies have ways to get the information out. And then nationally, if you're looking for kind of big, like we'll pull from any area, and there's a lot of transients right now, a lot of people moving between states and all of that, then you could go to your national chambers and file there. And then you kind of wait and see. I would say key things to keep in mind is, you mentioned it earlier when you were talking about your longtime associate, philosophies have to align. So I think some of those initial conversations have to be asking and gleaning their philosophy on patient care, their philosophy on dentistry, and how they approach the field, why they even approached the field in the first place. I think there's got to be some connection on that level for an associate to work, to be able to have an associate fit into a culture that's been created by the practice owner around a philosophy, and then to bring somebody in that's totally counter to that, it will fail every time. And I would say, and you're going to be surprised at this, but oftentimes the best associates are similar in personality as well. It doesn't mean that an opposite personality can't work. It just means there's going to require a lot more communication. So your longtime associate is an opposite personality to you, and it's worked beautifully.
Well, I would even say when I was an associate, I still remember this because it was going to be in a small town.
Yeah.
And, of course, we're talking over a decade ago, what, if I could do the math, almost not quite 20 years, but almost. And so, the area has definitely grown in diversity and all of that. But at that time, and it's still not the most diverse area, but at that time it was really not the most diverse area. And I remember meeting with the practice owner and kind of going, are your patients going to see me? And he looked at me and he goes, I have no idea. And so to me, it was definitely this, like, a gamble that both of us were taking. Yeah. And, talk about like completely different walks of life that we came from and completely different ways that we grew up and our families and our approaches. And yet our dental philosophies and what we wanted for our patients was very similar. But we still do laugh at, things that, how different we are. But like, to your point, like the other associate that helps me now, that's helped me on maternity leave, we are very similar. Mm-hmm. We are very similar. We get along beautifully in the practice because of how similar we are. So I've seen it, I've experienced it happening both. I would definitely say the key is going to be, and I think you were probably heading here, it's got to be a win-win. And I think that's where a lot of the mark is kind of left off. And especially now, associates it is kind of their field, kind of like with our staff, where they want the moon and we're supposed to give it to them. But not too long ago, the shoe was on the other foot, where, it's like, as the owner, well, I want this and I want this, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do, you're only going to do the hygiene checks, you're only going to do the fillings, and you're only going to do this. Come on, man, that is not fair. Is that what you would want if the tables were turned? So it's really got to be a win-win. And I was at a scheduling institute seminar, coaching seminar thing, and one of the colleagues I met there, she's a pediatric dentist. So it's not all for pediatric dentists. In fact, they had a lot of chiropractors there too. They work with different practices. But anyway, she was a pediatric dentist in like the Southeast, and she was saying something about how she's tried to have an associate. And the first one she had years ago, like 10 plus years ago, and maybe she didn't have a contract or something like that, and it burned her. And so then she was like burned and didn't want an associate. Well, now she kind of needs one. And she was like, came down to the nth thing, and we just couldn't agree on this final point. And I was like, if you don't mind my asking, like, what was the final point? And it was about the restrictive covenants. Of, where she couldn't, she's like, well, I left her this whole area where she could whatever, but she felt like it was too restrictive. And I kind of like went back to her again and kind of went, what are you scared of? What are you scared of that if you wanted this, like, whatever radius it was, 10, 15, 20 mile radius, which again, maybe in the Southeast that was kind of normal. Yeah. But I guess that's what she was so scared of, is this person up and taking all her patients. And from my side, I was like, well, where's your confidence level that you've built this up?
But you're nervous it could be taken away so easily.
Yeah. And so I just it just made me question and kind of go, but I guess from Scheduling Institute's viewpoint, they were like, okay, you've been burned before, but because of that one fear, like, did you just marry the first man that... Right. No, you had a bad boyfriend, a couple of bad boyfriends, which you finally found your husband, and it was worth it. And so here, like, you are leaving, I want to say they were like, you're leaving $10 million on the table because by having an associate, you could this, you could this, you could double your this, you could do that. And so because of fear of finding the wrong person,
you're not taking that leap of faith.
Yeah, you're not taking the leap of faith. And now you're drowning. And there are all these patients that could be served. So it was just interesting. And from her viewpoint, she's like, yeah, I'd rather leave the $10,000 on the table than be burned again. And so it was just kind of funny. So maybe she doesn't really need the income, maybe all of that to say it is you've got to be careful bringing in the wrong person. And are they not going to have the same, they maybe say they have the same philosophy, but then they're doing all this unnecessary dental work, or they want to be gone X number of times, they want to be gone all summer. And a pedo practice, stupid. Of course you're going to have to work in the summer. One of my colleagues, I love her to pieces, but that's one where she wanted to come kind of help. But she wanted to help, oh no, spring break, I go do this. And summer, I go do that. And Christmas break, oh no, I'm with my family then. Okay, well, those are all the key pedo times. So now you want to work in May, where there's nobody coming. We don't need the help. But you want this absorbent daily rate. Like, that was a complete win on her part, but the office was a loser.
Practice. Yeah.
And she never saw it that way. She saw it as, but I'm helping you. And I'm like, but you're not. And having never been a practice owner, she just never saw it.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't a win-win. But we hear that a lot too, right? Like the practice owner that's hogging up all the good stuff or hogging up all the good times and is only giving the associate, like you can't do that to the associate either. So
yeah.
There's going to have to be some compromise on both parties' side.
Mm-hmm. And the ability to get to a point where you can see that you're going to be okay with the associate winning as well. And that does take, we kind of started the podcast with where do you need to be emotionally? Like you need to be at an emotional place where the relief is going to be a help to you. You're going to depend upon that relief, and you're going to be happy in their success. Even if that's coming at your expense initially, you're going to be happy with that because it's going to eventually help you to win as well. And I think you make a really good point. Just because the first associate doesn't work doesn't mean that you don't need an associate. It just means that one didn't work well, and it's okay to start over and to try again. And so we can't throw out the baby with the bathwater and just go, oh, that didn't work for me because of this particular
scenario. I think a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do that. And so the challenge is, how do you dust yourself off and get back on again? And so it kind of goes back to the episode we did almost last year about your why. Mm-hmm. And so again, it is a quality of life, and it is, I cannot be here for everybody. And especially now, post-pandemic, we're all dying. Like the stresses are unlimited. And so at this point, is it worth your longevity in the field? Or are you going to be like selling your practice next year because you can't take anymore? Mm-hmm. Or do you want to be around for another 20 years? And so what is your give and take and compromise to that?
That's exactly right. And that is one of my favorite points with an associate, is that when the practice is at a point where you can afford it, it is worth the investment, just if nothing else, to increase your longevity in the practice, because the financial benefit of being able to practice long term is so worth the investment of time and money right now and bringing on an associate. Not to mention the end benefit of now you've essentially, by the time you retire, you've built up a practice that's a 2-doctor practice. It's productive enough for 2 doctors. And now from a retirement standpoint, you're able to make more off of that ending sell. So yes, it may not be immediately financially advantageous, although it will become quickly financially advantageous. And it's worth the risk to keep you in it now and to also benefit long term.
So in the same vein, I think a lot of people, from what I hear, and myself included, how do I know that I'm picking the right person? And associates are like this revolving door, and I don't want a revolving door for my patients and the stress that puts on the practice. So what suggestions or tips do you have for that? Like, again, for me, for this guy hanging out for 6 years, no way would I have predicted that. Like, he had told me the minute he walked in that he would be starting a practice. Mm-hmm. So I knew he would be revolving out. Mm-hmm. And then to speak for some of the others, the other one that we have that's still kind of helping on a PRN basis. So she's still around, and it's a win-win every time she's there for us. The other one was there 1 or 2 days a month, and she ultimately didn't work out because it's what I had just said. Like, she wasn't there when we needed her. She wanted to be there when she wanted to be there. And she had all of these parameters of, I don't want to see this, but I do want to see this, and I want to start at this time, and I don't want to start at this time, and it just became too much. And I love her dearly, but I found her because she was a colleague of mine, and she happened to have more time in her. Anyway, we discovered that I was busy enough I could use the help. She actually had just finished being super busy, and it just didn't work out very well. And we're still friends, and it's still great, but
it was not the right balance of win-win.
Yeah, it wasn't. And so we both just kind of like, it was a very amicable split. So that was that. Who else have we had? We had one that it was strange how we met too. But in the end, so she was a general dentist, so we knew she wouldn't stick around forever. And normally, as a pediatric dentist, I'm like, but I don't want a general dentist in here because my patients, again, we've got 100 in a 5-mile radius. So if a patient wanted to see a general dentist, they would have. They're coming to a pedo practice. So she was always there with somebody else, with the pediatric dentist, so that she was doing the hygiene checks. And then if there was something that she didn't know, that's how it was. It was really nice for me for a long time. I was always not always, but I was in there with her most of the time. And I could look at x-rays and treatment plan it and say, okay, go tell this to the parent. And then I could keep going with whatever admin stuff I was doing. Yeah. So it really helped. So I guess in her case too, we knew she wouldn't be there forever.
Right.
Anyway, I'm kind of going, so how do you prevent the revolving door of associates?
Yeah, so that is one that, again, the initial interview process, I think, is critical in that. As you've been sitting here talking, I was thinking about a practice that I helped them find 2 of their associates, and it's a partnership, two men that own this practice, and then the practice is big enough that it needs, a few years ago, it needed another associate, but they didn't want it to be a buy-in associate. But same concern, like, oh gosh, we're going to build up this practice for this 3rd associate, and then he or she's going to leave, and then we're going to be back in the same boat. What about the community, all of that? So we just had a really rigorous interview process because we wanted to make sure that it was mutually beneficial, that what this associate was looking for, the practice was offering, and what this practice was looking for, the associate was offering. And so it was a series of interviews. I was involved in that process, just initially trying to screen out anybody that didn't fit with that. I needed to find somebody that knew they didn't want practice ownership. And that is hard to find, number one. So we knew we were looking for a needle in a haystack. And then also I had to be able to get that out of the associate, and then for that associate to confirm that when they were meeting with the practice owners. And so ended up finding somebody. She was a couple years out of school, and she had been hired by somebody that owned multiple practices. She was in a very small remote town, like 10,000 people. It was really small, and she was completely on her own. So fresh out of school, got dropped in this practice, and then she is literally flying solo. And she did that for a couple years and knew with 100% certainty, I never want to be in a practice on my own ever again. And I don't want to own because of this, and this. So she was very clear with that as we moved through the interview process. And so then I knew, okay, this lady is looking for a group practice, but she wants private practice, and she never wants to own, which is also hard to find. And so it ended up just kind of being a match in heaven. We had to go through a lot of associates to find her, and we were willing to wait to find her.
When you say go through associates, meaning resumes, not actually bringing them in. It wasn't a rotating door. They never came in the door. It was just this list. Okay.
Yeah, it was just all of the applicants at that time. And then same thing, interestingly enough, a few years later, they're ready for the next associate, same practice, and same thing. Ideally, they don't want somebody that wants to purchase in at this point. So, man, we were back to the drawing board with, okay, we found the unicorn once. What's the likelihood that we find it again? We found a completely opposite situation that he had been practicing for years, had done a lot of ministry and mission work, was, I believe, 12 or 13 years into his career, and is settling back in, done with the mission work, ready to kind of, he was moving from East Coast to Texas, family, very close to family, family's all moving here, et cetera, et cetera. So as I started talking with this gentleman, it became clear that he was trying to decide whether or not practice ownership was for him. And as he and I talked more, his exact words to me were, I am trying to look for any reason not to own a practice. Like, ultimately, deep down in my gut, I just don't want to. But everybody's telling me at this point in my career, I need to own a practice. Financially, it makes the most sense. It's the best long-term decision, and I get it. I hear the sound advice, but I'm just trying to find an excuse not to own a practice. And I thought, there we go. because he needs a place where he can be financially successful enough that the benefit of owning a practice makes no difference to him. And I knew he could have that in this practice. And so completely opposite situation, right? The one that was young in her career and was like, I never want to practice alone again. And then this guy's going, just give me a reason not to own a practice. And I knew that it could be successful for him. So I would just say the diligence on the front end, being willing to have lots of different conversations, pulling in a person to give you perspective on this candidate. Like, hey, you've talked with me, talk with my husband, or my best friend, or my financial advisor. I don't care who it is. Talk with somebody that gives you a different perspective, because they may be slightly different with that person than they would be with the potential boss of them. And then do your due diligence. Be willing to wait for the right person to come along. And if you are not ever going to want a buy-in or somebody that partners in with you, I do think it's important to make that clear initially, because I feel like that's where the revolving door comes from. Is associate had this goal, this unspoken goal that, at least 2 or 3 years in, we could at least start talking about that. And that was never on the owner's mind. And so I think if that's off the table, it needs to be clear from the beginning that it's off the table.
So I'm glad you said that, because that to me, is it unfair for the owner to expect this associate to stay and then not? Like, am I going to have to partner at some point?
No.
And so I think that for me is where I've never really been in that situation because all the people that have been helping me, I know that they're not wanting to partner in. Like, it never made sense. For the 2 colleagues of mine, one of them has neither one has ever owned a practice or wanted to own a practice, and they've always been kind of PRN people. So the one that didn't work out in my office, but in her other office, that she's there 1 day a week, she's been 1 day a week there for 13 years.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so those 2, then you had the general dentist one that I knew, like, that would never partner. Like, it doesn't make sense. It's not what she wants to do. It's not like pedo was her passion. It just, we got along very well. We were in sync as far as philosophies and a win-win. So it lasted because of that. So then you get to associate, who I know is going to be leaving. So I've never really been in that situation until nowish. Mm-hmm. So now this associate doesn't seem on the surface like a personality that would ever really want to own a practice. Mm-hmm. And so then I had to decide and go, well, am I okay with that? Because don't I want to have somebody like help share this burden at some point? And so now I'm kind of going through, maybe I do, maybe I don't. It depends on the person. What do I want? Exactly. I don't know. I've never really been in this boat. And for him, he said, a couple of weeks ago, he said, I guess I should start looking at, would you ever be interested in partnering? Because I've never really asked you that. And I'm like, I don't know. I've never really been in that situation myself. And part of me goes, not really, because to me, a partner then is like another husband or marriage. And I feel like at this point, I kind of got this. Yeah. And so, because I've got you helping me and I've got the accountant who kind of like, I've been doing this now for long enough. Yeah, it's a good team. And like, what do you want? And so does it benefit me at all to have you come in and partner? Like, where's my win in this part of it? But if I say no, then you're going to walk and I'm going to start this revolving door again. Mm-hmm. So am I kind of tied into this now? So actually, when I came here, that's what first question for you was like, should I put a stop to this right now? Because if this is what he wants and I'm never gonna want it, like, I need to know what I gain out of this before I can make sure all of his wishes come true. And funny enough, like, he doesn't seem like the type who'd ever want to practice, but then he said the same thing. He's like, well, there's no such thing as a forever associate. Mm-hmm. I'm like, but there is. We all know them. And I listed off these people. Unfortunately, all the people that I listed off for him were all women. Mm-hmm. And so I think he's kind of going, and he's a sharp guy. So it's like, well, why would I keep working for you when I could eventually? But I just don't ever see him being passionate enough. Like, he's just so laid back. Yeah. But who knows? Maybe he could. Maybe once he's been, and that's what I've told him too. I said, maybe at some point you will. Like, or what if he's not married yet, doesn't have kids. So what if wife wants to move y'all to New York? And so, there's too many unknowns for you right now, but it's definitely something I'm having to think about myself now, going, okay, if you were to partner in. So I kind of asked him, I said, I don't know. I'm not in this situation before, but we can journey through this together because we got to figure out. And I said, so what I do know is if you came in and you said, oh, well, I want to change the name of the practice and I want to build another building and I want to have a satellite office and I want to, then right there, like, we're not going to make a good partnership.
Because philosophies aren't the same.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to. There is no way I could ever see myself starting another building. Because the team asked it right now, we're out of space. I'm like, no, we are not. You tell me when we are open 7 days a week with 2 of us here and 3 hygienists here all the time, then we're out of space. Yeah. I don't think we've barely done the 4 days a week thing for long enough. What do you mean we're out of space? We are not out of space. And so I just don't want to, so I guess that's, I kind of started and asked him, like, where do you see your role being in as a partner then? Like, what are you doing, to either help me or, like, is it just so you make more money?
Right. Because it goes back to your point. It's got to be win-win.
Yeah.
And so if he is coming in, at the beauty of a partner is you should have somebody to share the burden with. Just like you're having somebody to also share the success with, you have to be able to share the burden with that.
That part of me goes, do I want to share the burden with you? Because are you just going to make more of a burden for me?
True.
Like if we don't,
exactly.
So I'm just like, as far as the burdens, I've gotten us through a pandemic now, and I'm still standing. So, what can you give me? Like, at this point, I can't see what he could bring to the table. The only benefit that I see him bringing to the table at this point is not having a revolving door. Mm-hmm. So, is that enough for me to sell part of my baby to? And maybe the answer is yes. I don't know that yet. So the other question I asked him was like, well, what do you want? What do you see you bringing or decreasing the burden, or what? I guess I just don't know what that means. So we need to figure that out. The other thing is, I was like, well, why do you want to partner with me? Because you could really partner anywhere, or you could go start your own. So what is it that you're wanting to partner? And I think that for me, I feel like he still needs to do a lot of soul searching to go, do I really want this?
Right.
Or is it just everybody's telling me that this is what I need to have?
Well, and the great thing about it is y'all have been so honest with one another in this initial start of this, it's very fresh, this conversation, that y'all are both able to speak with clarity on what you don't know and what you do know. And I think, you and I were even talking before we started podcasting that ultimately you've got time, because he's not wanting to purchase in now. He's like, I think I might. I don't know. I think I might want to consider in a year or 2 from now. And so y'all have time to very openly and honestly work through all of the channels of emotions and thought processes and how you would divide and conquer really for the next year as y'all continue this conversation. And then, like you said, you both very well may come to the decision of, yes, we think this is actually going to work and we want it to work, or we've worked hard at this for a year and it just doesn't seem to add up or make any sense. And then again, it may mean a new associate at that point, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Right.
Yeah. Who knew we had so much to say about associates, right?
Right. But I think ultimately, I have not regretted the decision. It is absolutely worth the investment. But I would say it definitely on the front end, making sure you're asking all the right questions. Because if you're just kind of going, okay, well, we're going to tweedledee into this, and then you're going to take this from me, and I'm going on vacation this time, and you're doing this, and you're doing that, you're setting yourself up for disaster. And I would definitely say, like, how would you want to be treated? I know it sounds like an elementary concept, but how would you want to be treated right now? And kind of like what you and I were saying before, my one coordinator person is trying to put like all the IV cases with me. Well, why would an associate stay?
Right.
You're doing all the diagnosing, and then I'm getting to see the patient and get the production for that. That's ultimately not fair to the associate. And so it's counterintuitive that I would be the one to step in to defend him for that and try to get the IV on his, it should be me. Typically it's the owner doctor that's going, no, give me all the good stuff. Let him just but that's not fair. And I know what's going to happen. Would I stick around if it was the other way? I would not stick around. So if I would not stick around, why am I asking him to do that as well?
Exactly.
Now, if he was one who didn't want to see IV cases and who wasn't concerned with production and doing all of that, that's a different story. But he has made it very clear
that he is.
He is. And so I can't not. So we're making changes in the schedule to make sure that he gets access to what it is that he's wanting.
Yeah.
Even down to going to the OR is a big thing for him. And to me, honestly, it used to be a big deal to me too. And then the pandemic has changed all of that. And I said, I'm open to you going to the OR. Well, most of the cases that need to go to the OR are Medicaid cases. Well, we're not Medicaid providers now because XYZ. Basically, it's a logistical nightmare. Like, it's become so difficult to do anything with that. And so I'm like, if you want to take that on, I can give you where we left off. You go research it. You make it happen by all means.
Yeah,
we
go
can
right
make
ahead.
This work.
Yeah.
Right. And he kind of paused and went, oh. There's just a lot of logistical things he hadn't thought about. And so I was like, I don't want to be the naysayer here, but this is where, like, I don't know if this is a problem or not, but this is what we'd have to investigate. And then we'd have to investigate this, and then we'd have to investigate that, and then we'd have to hire this person, and then we have to do that. So if you can get me answers to all of that, I'm more than happy to figure out, let's make this work. And he ultimately was like, maybe we'll just wait for now. I'm like, okay, well, we will wait for now then.
So you say wait, we shall wait. Yeah.
Yes. So.
But again, that perspective alone, even that dialogue is helpful, for you've been in it, you've walked that path already. He hasn't. And so for him to be informed in that process of this is something I want, why, we should do this in our practice. And for that to be met with just very real education on this is what the decision was to, X that out of our practice. And this is what it would take to bring that back into the practice. And then kind of putting the ball in his court to go, if that is something you want, yes, take it and run with it. That's win-win, right? That's a win-win strategy, because if an associate comes to a doctor and says, I really want us to get OR going in the practice, and the practice owner just says, no, we X'd that a long time ago, sorry. Well, we've prevented that associate from potentially pursuing something that could be very satisfying for the associate and also beneficial for the practice. And so, again, that goes back to what would you want in that case if you're bringing this to your boss?
Well, and we stopped right at the pandemic because it just didn't make sense. We have a whole podcast about that, but I don't know what's changed in 2 years. Maybe Medicaid has lightened up and is not requiring all the crazy things they were requiring. Maybe they are. Maybe it has made it easier. I'm just unaware of that, and I don't really feel like researching it.
Yeah.
So if you do,
go ahead.
Maybe your friends that have just graduated are saying, no, this authorization, and then this, and then that, those are all things of the past, but Medicaid has come a long way because they were realizing how restrictive that was and how they had no providers who were willing to jump through those hoops. They've changed it. That's very possible.
Right.
But I'm not researching it. That ship has sailed as far as I'm concerned. But you want to research it and you want to tell me that things have changed and bring me a list of what it would take? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely open to it. I'm just not informed currently.
Yes.
And I don't want to be informed
And
currently.
you do not wish to be informed
I have
currently.
enough other things to do. So.
Oh my goodness. Well, thanks for joining the conversation I just felt like this was such a necessary topic right now. And you and I have talked a lot about this throughout the years, but even now dialoguing again, like it's such a good comprehensive thought process on this whole thing. The importance of associates when a practice is ready, and just is the practice ready? When is it ready? And then all the thought processes into the emotional side of it. But I think it's super advantageous. I think you're still sitting here today as a practice owner in large part because of your associates, and that's the value of them.
I would have sold a long time ago if not for the joy that they brought. Like when I'm there, to enjoy my day more, pre-pandemic, especially post-pandemic, but even pre-pandemic, to enjoy my day more. And then also to be able to step away and have a little work-life balance. Like, to me, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you have made it to the end of the Associate Series. all three parts, which means that you likely are interested in an associate. And so I wanted to give you a few next steps for those who are seriously considering an associate. First and foremost, it comes down to, is your practice financially ready for an associate? So I would absolutely encourage you to get with your CPA or financial advisor. If you don't have one, that's your first step. You need somebody who can help you make an intelligent decision for the sake of your practice, and somebody who's familiar with the ins and outs of a dental practice is always who I would go to first. So if you don't have one of those in place, definitely get one in place. And then I would arrange a conversation or meeting with him or her to really look at the financial state of your practice and if you can afford an associate. If, as you dialogue with your financial planner or CPA, you determine that there is room in the budget, the next question becomes, how much room is in the budget? Are you looking at a part-time associate 1 or 2 days a week, or do you have room in the budget for a full-time associate? If you do have room in the budget for a full-time associate, it's incredibly important that you then take a hard look at your practice. Do you have the capacity or the pool of patients to be able to support a full-time associate? Now, you're not going to, in my mind, have a 2-doctor practice when you only have one doctor in place. That would be very difficult unless that doctor is working 6 or 7 days a week or running a very intense schedule. But my guess is that you at least might have enough for 1.5 doctors. And if you have enough for 1.5 doctors, then what is your practice going to have to do to grow to support a full-time second doctor in the practice? Keeping in mind that that will not happen overnight. There is normally a period of several months where the office acclimates up to that full-time second provider. But if you and your CPA or financial advisor determine that you can afford a full-time associate, then you need to look at, okay, what can our practice do to support a full-time associate? And are there any efforts that need to be made right now to begin to prepare the way for a full-time associate? Meaning, should we start marketing heavily? Should we start running our schedule a little bit differently in order to preserve some patients for this associate? Or do I need to add staff to my practice to be able to support a full-time associate? All of those things would be if, in the first place, you and your financial advisor decide that you can afford an associate. Once you've talked with your advisor, once you've taken a look at, do you have the pool of patients necessary to add a part-time or full-time associate, the third component is going to be looking at the actual physical layout of the office and thinking, do I have the space for not only an associate, right? Most people, not all, but most people can find one operatory that they could spare on a particular day to give to an associate. However, depending upon the type of practice that you run, is one operatory going to be enough to make that associate productive for the practice? So it's not necessarily just chair space. That is part of it. If you don't have a chair available, then you have to look at what you can do to your physical space to add a chair for that associate. But then the second component to that is, if you only have one chair or can only make one chair available, is that doctor going to be able to produce enough out of that one chair to, number one, pay his or her bill, but second of all, to produce enough for the practice to make it worth your while and make it worth the associate's while? So many of you might have the option in your practice to run the primary doctor's schedule a little bit differently. So maybe in your practice, you have a day a week that is for sedation and surgery type patients, and the rest of your week may be your typical patient base. But one day a week, your primary doctor only needs 1 chair. And so on that 1 day a week, that associate might have the ability to take the spare chair that you always have available and also utilize the primary doctor's 2nd chair. So on that day, the associate could have 2 chairs available and thus in theory, be more productive. You can also look at a day in your practice where maybe you run a lighter hygiene schedule and therefore you have the capacity to allow your associate to utilize both the overflow chair that isn't used as well as a hygiene chair. But then you have to ask yourself, okay, if I have that hygiene chair available, what do I need to do to equip that room to be a true production operatory? So that's another thing to think about. So look at your physical space and determine what type of capacity that you have, or what type of capacity could you create in your physical space to make room for an associate. The last thing that you would need to think about after you've looked at the finances, after you've looked at your practice and your physical and patient capacity, is going to be your timeline. How quickly do you want to pull on an associate? That could be driven by your personal needs. Maybe your family's expecting a new child and you'd love to have an associate in place by the time that child arrives. Maybe you've got some surgeries that are coming up in the future and you know that you'd love to have an associate incorporated. Maybe you are just burning out and you know that you'd love to have somebody in place sooner rather than later. Or potentially you have a longer timeline. This is a future plan that you have in place. No matter what it is, put the timeline down. And then whatever the timeline is, let's say it's within 3 months, you'd love to have an associate. Back it up 2 months. So you want to have 2 months working alongside that associate to get them fully acclimated. So if there is a physical or personal need to have an associate in place in 3 months, you need to actually find that associate within 1 month so that you and that associate have time to work together. Let's say your timeline's longer and you go, you know what, in 6 months, I'm going to be going through an elective health surgery and I'd love to have an associate in place. Again, back it up 2 months. So you'd want to have that associate in place by 4 months instead of 6 months. If you have the luxury of time and this is just a goal that you're setting forth, then set your goal and you can hire an associate at that goal date. You don't necessarily have to back it up 2 months because your goal was to start with an associate in a year, let's say. So you can keep that timeline and know that you'll need an associate by a year, or you want an associate by a year and you don't have to back it up. However, I will let you know that in hiring an associate, you want to give yourself time. So normally it takes 1 to 2 months to find an associate, a good associate. That's not always the case, but I would give yourself 1 to 2 months to find the associate, work through the contract, and ultimately get that person started. Keep in mind too, many associates have to give notice to the office that they're currently working with, and that is often a 30 or 60, sometimes even a 90-day notice. So keep all of those things in mind when you're building out your timeline. Overall, I hope this series has been incredibly helpful for you if you are thinking about an associate either short-term or long-term. I think these 3 episodes will give you the bulk of the information that you need to be able to get going. I wish you all the best and hope you find the perfect associate for your practice.
Thanks for joining the conversation today. We hope that you are comforted in knowing that you are not alone, but we also hope that you're walking away with some really great tips and tricks to try in your practice. We value your feedback, so please take a few moments to rate and review the podcast. Finally, we want to make sure that we're covering the topics that matter to you. So track us down on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what topics you want us to cover. As always, please know that we are rooting for you today as you manage your dental drama.